The GreenSock animation platform, also known as GSAP, is the most popular way to integrate scroll-based animations on websites. You do this with their Scroll Trigger plugin. But at first, it can be very tricky to understand how to control both the timing of your animations and when they come in, when they leave, etc. So that is exactly what this video is about. I'm going to help you understand a few key properties in the Scroll Trigger plugin so that you can animate with confidence. If you enjoyed this video, check out designcourse.com where you can learn UI, UX, CSS, and more with my custom interactive platform that makes learning fun and easy. All right, so here we are in the project file in our index.html. I'm going to real quickly just describe the HTML, which is right here. It's super simple. All it is just a spacer to create some white space at the top and also a spacer at the bottom to create white space at the bottom so that when we scroll down, we can have enough room to accurately describe what's happening with our scroll activated animations. So we have one in the middle as well, and inside of it, we have a card, very simple card. We also have our main.sass file right here. As you can see, there's not many rule sets, fairly simple. We are starting with that card, which is the animated element class at left -400 pixels to push it off the screen. And then we'll use our GSAP to bring it back in, and we'll use that as the demonstration to describe what's happening here for timing your animations. So next up after that is we want to import GreenSock animation platform from a CDN right here on this line. Underneath it, we also want to use an import scroll trigger. And then optional here is Lennis, which is a smooth scroll library I've covered a couple times on the YouTube channel. You can do a channel search if you want to learn more about it, but basically it just makes it so that when you're scrolling down, it feels smooth. All right, so it doesn't just stop abruptly. I kind of like that when working with these type of scroll-based animations. So now that we have that all out of the way, just make sure if you make changes to your CSS, the Sass file, click Watch It for the Live Sass compiler extension to install over here, and then finally right-click Open with Live Server to watch your index.html. And if you do that, at this point in the tutorial, you're not going to see anything. So I'm scrolling up and down, and that's because, again, we're pushing that card off to the left of the screen. So let's get started. The very first thing I want to do is bring up, if I come over here, Lennis. All right, we're going to go to GitHub Studio Freight Lennis and just grab the initial setup code. You can just copy and paste this, and you're going to have Smooth Scroll ready to rock. And then we'll write our GSAP on top of that. So we could just Smooth Scroll. All right, that's good. And then you can verify that works afterwards when we start to play around with getting this card into view. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to create a timeline animation. So to do that, we say let timeline, or TL, is gsap.timeline. All right, and inside here, we're just going to leave this empty initially. All right, so you could just do this. There you go. Boop, boop, boop. I'm screwing things up. Okay, stop that. Okay, there we go. And then after that, we're going to say timeline to animated element. All right, and we're going to set X to 800 pixels. That's all we're going to do. So if we save this and we go back to our document, there it is. And notice the smooth scroll is rocking. Awesome. All right, so the reason we don't see this animate initially is because of that spacer is occupying the screen and pushing it down, and because we don't have it tied to the scroll trigger, it's just animating right when we load automatically. So like for instance, if I refresh, there you go. You can kind of see it come in if I scroll down fast enough. Okay, so what we want to do now in order to get the scroll trigger integrated is open up the options here in our timeline. All right, and inside of that, we define a scroll trigger object, and then it has a number of different properties. So the first one is going to be trigger, and we're going to basically specify in the DOM our animated element class, which is the card right here. That's the thing that we want to animate, so we specify that in the trigger property. And then we have the two properties that we're going to probably focus on the most, which is start, and we're just going to say top and center. I'll describe these in a second, and then end is going to be bottom and center. And then we're also going to specify scrub true. All right, so this is very important, and I'll describe that in a second as well. And then markers, we're going to set as false for now, which is the default value, but I want to show you the before and after, so I'm going to just leave it at false. And then we're going to leave that there, all this stuff good and ready right there. So if I save this and we go back and I scroll down, look at that. It's now working. So if I just use my mouse scroll wheel, come up, it leaves. If I scroll down, it comes in and stays, and it's all timed pretty nicely. Okay, so what exactly is happening here? So essentially, what I wanted to describe as much as possible is the start and end properties. So we have basically two different values that we specify in this string. The first is going to be right here where it says top, and the start and end kind of work similarly, except just on the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, when do we start the animation versus when do we end the animation? So top is these first two values where it says top and bottom is in relation to the element that you're targeting. So the top of that element versus the bottom of that element. So you want to start that element when it comes to animation based on the top of the animated element. Now, you can put top, right, bottom, left, etc. You could do center even. And you can also do pixel-based or numerical values. So if you wanted to start like at 20% from the top of the element, you can do that as well. And it also accepts negative values. So it's very, I guess you could say, flexible and dynamic in that sense. And then we have the second property, which is in relation to defining the actual scroll trigger. If you want to visualize this stuff and what exactly it means, turn on markers. So we're going to take markers and we're going to say true. Once we do that, you're going to see if I zoom up right here, it says scroll start and scroll end. All right, so those are the first two things that I'm going to focus on. Scroll start and scroll end is in relation to these values right here. They're both set at the same exact value of center, and it happens to be the center of the viewport. Notice, if we look at this viewport from top to bottom, these appear to be exactly in the center. All right, you can change these values to a bunch of other stuff as well. And it will change the placement of those markers and thus the animation, timing, duration, when it starts, etc. So then if we scroll up, you're going to see two other markers as well. So if I zoom up, you can kind of see the start and end. Those start and end parameters essentially are in relation to the first two values that you defined here. The start, in this case, which it was the green little label, it said start, is in relation to the value defined here, where it says top in the start property. And then as such, the same thing with bottom here on the end property, and it has the red end label. So again, just to look at that real quickly, we have our start here, which is the top of the target element. So if I bring this in, there we go. You can kind of see this better. We've defined it, the start of this animation will be tied to the start of the top of this card. That's why we put top as the value, thus start is right here at the top of it. Same thing with end, right there. So you'll notice, if I zoom out real quickly, if I very carefully just drag it down, you'll see the animation starts right where it says scroller start, and also where start starts to meet that section, or surpass it rather. And then you'll see it ends when the end matches the scroller end of the scroll trigger. All right, so we can play around with these values. So for instance, if you think perhaps when you're scrolling, you think it kind of comes in too quick and you'd rather it not come in that quick, you can play around with both of these properties to affect the duration, the length of time it takes based on the scroll for the animated element to get to, it's to change its properties. In this case, we're only using the X values. We're only moving it over, but you can change a lot more. And so you could also use it in relation and adjust these values to control when it comes in as well. So that's really important to kind of understand. Maybe you want it to come in right instantly, when this section comes into place, or maybe you want it to come in later. All right, so let's take a look at that. So if you take a look, it says start top center and bottom center. What if, for instance, we wanted to make the animation happen a lot faster than what it is? It's already happening pretty fast, but here's one way we can do it. Our goal is to take the start and the end and move them closer together. So we could just take this value and say maybe 35% from the top is going to be the new start position. So it's not going to be the top of the element. It's going to be 35% from the top. If we do that and we look, you'll see that we've brought these a little bit closer together right here. So now the animation is going to happen faster. All right, so what if we want the animation to occur a little bit more quickly in the scroll trigger? So we want to move the scroller's start and end down further. Okay, so how will we do that? Well, we can go ahead and then where it says center, we can go ahead and say maybe 80%. And then we can do the same thing if we're going to leave those tied together. Notice now it's way down here. So if I come down here and I scroll, it's going to start a lot quicker than when it was in the center of the viewport. Now, of course, we can also separate these values. They don't have to be the same values where they both start and end in the same scroll trigger section. So what we could do is maybe this is going to be 20% for that value, all right, from the top of the viewport. So now the end is way up here and the scroller start is way down there. And so what happens is, notice how much basically the further apart the scroller end and scroller start are, it's going to increase the time it takes for your element to animate in. So as you can see, this versus when it was both tied to center in this at the same element, look how fast it is. So that's how you can kind of control the timing of your animation. Even though it's tied to the mouse scroll wheel and the scroll, like how fast it's going, you have a pretty fine control over the ability to make those adjustments. So let's redo back to here real quickly. So this was 80%, and I believe the other one was what, 20? Yep, 20%. There we go. So this is where we left off. And I just wanted to do a couple more demos here to describe what's happening. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to do the opposite on the start and end. Let's take these values and put them back to center. All right. And let's say, for instance, you wanted to do the opposite where you want to expand the start and end. So what we could do on the start, we can go ahead and say something like negative 50%. So now we're going to see that start way up here in relation to where the target element starts. It's down here and it's up 50%, which is based on the height of this element essentially. And then for the end element, we could do something like 50%. Now, one thing that happens here that's a little bit strange, it's now like in the middle of the element itself. So what we could do is we could change this, say, to 200%. And now look at that. It's down, way down here. And it kind of has the same effect as adjusting the scroller start and end position, or the two values at the end, in that the further away these are apart, the longer it'll take for the element to animate in, essentially. And so you can play around with those four values to perfectly time your scroll-based animations, especially when you have scrub set to true. And that's going to be the other thing that I talk about here. When scrub is set to false, something interesting happens. So essentially, if I refresh, we're going to see that it is not tied to the actual scroll position as I'm scrolling. It'll simply play the animation no matter what. So watch, if I go down and stop, right there, it just comes in and that's it. It's no longer tied to my scroll position. So you're able to achieve a very different type of animation where once these scrollers start in the start position meet, you have your animation, and then you can time the animation through the duration property down here. So if you want it to last like, let's see, 5 seconds, then we can come down here and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it goes into its final position. Now, when you decide to use scrub false, then you can also use toggle actions. And this is another property that gets very confusing when you're first trying to learn it, essentially. And it takes 4 different values. And for those values, you're controlling essentially what the element does based on your start and end properties here. You can make it play, you can make it rewind, you can make it restart, you can make it complete. So for the first value, we have on enter. All right, so what I mean by that is I'm just going to put on enter. That's not actually what you can put here in these values, but I just want to real quickly demonstrate the labels of what they represent. So on enter simply means is when you're scrolling down and the top edge of the animated element comes into view. All right, so let me show you what I mean by that. If I go over here, don't save that, by the way. If I scroll down, it means right there, the top element when it comes into view. Now, of course, this also depends on how you structure where the top value is in your start property right here. So that comes into play. And then inside of this first value, you don't put on enter. That's just what it represents. You can put something like play. You want to play the animation when it enters. All right, the view as defined in your start and end properties right here. Again, this stuff, these toggle actions won't work when you have scrub true because the position of the element is tied to the mouse scroll wheel, not based on some predefined duration down here. Okay, so then you have on leave, which is the opposite. On leave is basically when you're scrolling down and the top edge of the animated element scrolls past and disappears from the view, if that makes sense. So for instance, if I'm over here and I scroll past, like right here is when on leave will fire or trigger or start. So on leave, we could just do, for instance, pause. So you can pause it. So on enter back is the opposite of play, except you're scrolling in the other direction. All right, so we're scrolling up, and there we go. So on enter back, which is the third property right there, or value that you could specify, it's basically so you're scrolling back up, and the bottom edge of the animated element comes into view. That right here is on enter back. And then on leave back is going to be when we're scrolling back up and the bottom edge of the animated element scrolls past and disappears from view. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So on enter back, we could say, I think we will try reverse, and we could try complete here. So let's see what happens when we specify these elements. Now, again, I made that really long. Let's just do like 500 millisecond. Wait, we'll just do 0.5. There we go. That'll work. Okay. So let's refresh. Now, if I scroll down, we're going to see it right there. It comes in. Nothing happened. Now we come back out. Yep, right there. So that's where reverse came into play. And notice it's all tied still to these markers. Everything happens when these markers are in a certain position and meet each other. So scroll start right there is play. That's when on enter fired. And then right down here, right there is where it says pause. So if we wanted to do maybe reverse right there instead, let's refresh. Let's scroll down. So we have on enter, which is play. Now here is going to reverse. See, you have a lot of timing. You have a lot of potential to really custom tailor these animations. So then we have on enter back, and we've set that to reverse. We'll try putting play here on enter back so that it comes back into view. All right, so look at that, that's reversed. Now when we come back, now it's played, and that's the third value. So we decided to make it come back into view. All right, and then finally we have the very last one, which is complete. So let me minimize that for a second. So if we refresh, we see it, it hides. We come back on enter back, and then on leave, it just says complete. So when we scroll back down here, it doesn't start. So maybe it doesn't redo it again. So maybe instead of complete, we can say maybe reverse here. So we come back here, we scroll up, it comes back into view, and then it reverses. So as you can see, you have a ton of control based on the type of animation you have. So if we set this back to true for scrub, which is a scroll-based timing, see? And then if you set it back to scrub to false, you also have just another way of animating your elements based on time rather than the scroll position. Very, very cool stuff. Hopefully that was able to help you out if you're working with Scroll Trigger and some of those properties are confusing in terms of how they work. Remember, just to turn on markers while you're trying to time your animations, and then you get to set markers to false, and all these labels go away. So as always, make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this content, leave a comment, a like, and all that good stuff. And very shortly, within a few months, we're gonna have a pre-launch of the interactive JavaScript advanced front ends course where we talk about this stuff and demonstrate it, and I teach it from the absolute ground up so that you can create really awesome animated interactive experiences in the web. All right, everybody, that's enough blabbering on, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.